Welcome to the Data Hall YouTube channel. In our previous video, we discussed how to work with a vector. And in this video, we are going to continue our discussion with matrix. So we are going to discuss how do we create a matrix, how do we access the data from a matrix, how do we assign column or row name, and different functions that we can use with a matrix. So the difference between matrix and a vector is that vector was a single dimensional, one-dimensional object, but a matrix is a two-dimensional object. So we have rows and columns. In vector, there were no rows or columns, but in matrix, we have rows and columns. So let's look into how do we create a matrix. Firstly, we use this function called matrix, and within this function, we need to specify certain things. So the first parameter is the data. We need to specify what would be the data. So this data is the name of the parameter, and we would assign it these values. So this again is a vector, right? So we would assign it this vector. And then after comma, we would have to specify how many rows or columns do we want. So, so in this case, we want this matrix to be divided into 2 rows and 3 columns. So if I execute this, we see over here that we have 3 columns and 2 rows. And one of the limitation of vector was that we can only have one data type. So if a vector was a character data type, its all values would be considered character. The same is the limitation with the matrix. So it would either be character, logical, numeric, so whatever the data type is, it would be a single data type. So it cannot be a mix of different types. So one column cannot be character and the second column would be numeric. That would not happen with the matrix. You can do that with data frame, which we will discuss in our next video, but with matrix, that is not going to happen. Now, if you look at this, this data, what it did is we wanted it to create 2 rows and 3 columns, but how do it paste the data into the matrix? How do we create a matrix? It starts with the column, with the first column. So it moves in column by column, right? So A, B, then the second column, C, D, and then the third column, E, F. If we wanted it to move by row, then we would give true to this by row parameter. So this is the same data, same command as we did before, but I have introduced a new parameter. If I execute this, then you would see that it moves by row, right? Rather than by column. So the default is by column. And if you want it to be by row, then you can set that to true. Now we can assign this obviously to certain object. So let's just say if I want it to be saved into object A, then I would just assign it to object A, press Control Enter, and that would be assigned. It would say it is a character matrix and it contains 6 elements. And if I click on that, we would see that it would have these elements. There would be columns and rows as opposed to vector. We can also create a numerical vector, or we can assign a range of values. So what I did is I used the same function, assigned value 1 to 10. This is the range, and we want 2 rows. Let me assign that to this object num. And so let me perform this. Okay, so if I wanted to look into the object, then we know that there were 10 and it moves by column, right? That is the default. We're going to have a character vector. This is a character vector. And we can use this vector. So in this case, I gave a specific range within this matrix function. But what I'm doing over here is I'm creating a vector and then passing that vector into this matrix function, right? So that is exactly same as doing this. So either you can create a vector and pass it into the matrix function, or you can give the data within this matrix function. I would just create this mat matrix because we are going to use it. So if I want to create 2 columns, so in this case, I'm creating 2 rows, but I want to create 2 columns. So that would be like this. Now what if I were to divide? There are six characters, right? 6 data elements. If I were to divide it into number of columns, which it cannot divide equally. So if I assign 4 number of columns, what would happen is it would give me a warning that it is not a multiple of number of columns. And the matrix that what would happen to the matrix, because the first element would go into the first row, first column, and it would move by column wise. So there are 6 elements, and now these 6 elements had been done, right? These 3 elements and then these 3 elements. These were the part of this original character vector. What about this ABC and John? Because this is a repetition. So what happens is that once it has consumed all the elements of that vector, it would start to replicate. As we have discussed in our previous video, that happens with the vector if you are doing certain arithmetic with vectors. So it would give us a warning, but it would perform the task. Okay, so let's just say there are other ways of combining vectors. So there is a function cbind and rbind, which stands for column binding and r binding, row binding. So let's just say if we have these 3 vectors, first name, last name, and age, and we want to combine them column wise. So we already have a specific video on this cbind and rbind. You can check on our channel. But I would give just an overview. So what would happen is that these 2 columns would be combined, and if a matrix would be formed. So we can assign obviously that matrix to certain object if you want to, but I would not create these objects so that my environment is clear. I can also combine row wise, right? And there is this vector. Yeah, so we can use cbind or rbind to combine and make a matrix. So this is what we are discussing. How do we create a matrix? So we can use cbind and rbind, and that would create a matrix. So we can also check the class of these vectors or the class of these matrices. So we know that this vector is not a numeric vector, right? But age is a numeric vectors. So what would happen if we combine, using the cbind, let's just say we combine this vector f name, l name, and age. So this age is numeric, but these 2 are character vector. So what would be this resultant vector? What would be the class of this resultant vector? Would it be character vector or a numeric vector? So this is how it would look like. And if you know from the quotation marks, we now know that these numbers had been converted into characters. And let's just check whether this matrix, this full matrix, this matrix by the name of full, is it a numeric or not? So it says false. What about character? Is it a character or not? Yes. So what happens is that although this vector was numeric, but because we have assigned it, we have combined it into a matrix with other character vectors. And we have discussed previously that a matrix can only have one data type. So all the elements would have just one data type. Either they all would be numeric or they all would be character. So it would convert the numerics into characters. So how do we assess data from a matrix? So this is the matrix that we just created, right? There are 3 columns and 2 rows. And you can look over here, there are certain numbers within brackets. There is a comma sign and then there are numbers, whereas in rows we have number first and then comma. So there is this pattern. What we can do is we can use these to extract the data points of that matrix. So this ABC is in the first row and first column. So what we do is we write the name of the matrix, and then within the brackets we specify first the row and then the column. So we want to get the element that is in the first row and the first column. So that would be this ABC. That is what we get. So what if we want to get an element in the first row and the third columns? That would be USA. We can also get all the columns from the first row, or in other words, we get all the data from the first row. So we know that this is the first row and this is how we are writing it over here. So we want to get this whole first row. So that would be ABC, XYZ and USA. What if we just wanted to get this third column? How do we write it? We do not specify the row number, and after comma we just specify the column number. So it would get us the third column, which is USA and he. If we want to get everything except for the first column, then what we do is we assign this minus sign to this column. So it would get us everything except for the first column, right? So the first column contains ABC and John. What if we want to get everything except for the first row? And that would get us the second row, obviously, the remaining row. What if we do not want the first row and the first column? Just think of it. What should you get? So we do not want this first row. So these are gone. And then we do not want this first column. So this John is also gone. So we just get 9 and he, right? We can also do certain conditions. So we want, so we had this matrix by the name of num. Let me look at that matrix. We have 10 numerical values. So we want to get the values where this num matrix is greater than 5. So those values that are greater than 5 would come over here. Then we can also use certain specific numbers. So for that we would use this percentage in percentage sign. So what we are saying is that from this num matrix, check this num matrix, and within this num matrix only get these values. So if the values is equal to 3, 5 or 9, and that is what we get. These are not the column numbers, but just the specific values within the matrix. It just happens to be the same values in this specific case. We can also assign row and column names. So if we look at our MAT matrix, we have these numbers as column numbers and then rows as row numbers. But we can assign names to them. That would be more meaningful. So let's just say we have 3 columns. So we can assign these names, right? Column 1, column 2, or column 3, or whatever names you want, to the column names of this matrix. So we use this function column names. What that would do is it would take the column names, this part, and assign these values to it. So that's quite interesting, right? Okay, so now you can see that column name had been assigned. We can also do that to row names. So take row names of MAT matrix, the matrix by the name of MAT, and assign it these row names, right? And now if we look at our matrix, we can see that. We can get the row names or column names again by just typing row names, the function row names, and specifying the matrix, and that would just print out the name of the rows, just in case we want. Now it gets easy to just get a specific value. So if we wanted to get this USA value, then we know that it is in column 3 and row 1. So we are not, extracting this value based on the number of column or the number of rows, right? Number of row. We are extracting it based on the name of the row and the name of the column. So name of the row and the name of the column, but do use inverted commas. We can, I'll just say, I do not like these row names. I just want to get rid of them. What I can do is I can take row names of this MAT matrix and assign null. So null means nothing. So do not use inverted commas for null, right? If you do that, if you do it like this, that would mean that you want this character null to be assigned, but we do not want that. So if Let's look at the matrix, and the row names had been gone. We can perform certain functions in matrix. So if you want to check whether this mat object over here, is it a matrix or not, we can use this isMatrix function, right? And then specify the name of that object, and it says true, it is a matrix. We can check the dimensions using this dim function. So this is 2 rows and 3 columns. We can check the number of rows or number of columns or the length of the matrix. So length would mean how many number of observations are there in this specific matrix. So I hope that was useful, but mostly we do work with data frames when we work with data science projects. So it is important that you do watch our next video, which is related to how do we work with data frames. So thanks for watching this video. Do subscribe the channel and do hit the bell icon.